Hey everyone. My blog today stems from the fact that I'm tired of listening to all the doomsaying and the hand-wringing and the alarmism with respect to Obamacare. And I thought what I would do today is offer a little snapshot of what Social Security was like back in the 1930s and 1940 when it was first launched. Because I think that the similarities between Obamacare and Social Security, at least at the time of their launch, are very instructive and very interesting. So the first similarity between the two programs was that they both faced legal challenges, strong legal challenges. Around the time of the passage of Social Security in 1935, the Supreme Court was tilting very much to the right. They were involved in dismantling many of FDR's New Deal programs, even his core programs. For example, when New York State tried to establish a minimum wage, the Supreme Court struck it down as being an unconstitutional infringement upon the right of employers and workers to form contracts with one another. So the minimum wage, which we all take for granted today, couldn't get by that Supreme Court. So it was no surprise that many people felt that this new social insurance program was not going to pass muster constitutionally. What happened was, in 1937, when the Supreme Court reviewed Social Security, Associate Justice Owen Roberts switched his vote in the 11th hour and saved Social Security. So Social Security was basically hanging on a precipice at that point, and a switch by one judge saved it, much as a switch by another Roberts, John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, saved Obamacare. By the way, those two Robertses have no relation to one another. So both had to surmount a legal challenge. Both also faced strong legislative and political challenges. Social Security was opposed not only from the right, people who claimed that it was a new socialist departure on the part of the government, but it was also opposed from the left. For example, Senator Huey Long of Louisiana filibustered many of FDR's programs, feeling that they didn't go far enough to redistribute wealth. On the right, Republican candidate Alf Landon, who ran against FDR in 1936, didn't exactly oppose Social Security, but he hated the payroll tax, which would fund Social Security. So a lot of that 1936 election involved a difference of opinion about Social Security, in which Alf Landon bitterly opposed this new program. So there's another similarity between Obamacare and Social Security. In each case, the Republicans put up a presidential candidate who fought these programs, and in both cases, the Republicans got their rear end kicked in the presidential elections of their respective years. So both Social Security and Obamacare had to overcome hurdles legally, they had to overcome hurdles politically, legislatively. But the biggest similarity and the biggest hurdle that they had to overcome was the administration of these massive programs. Back in 1935, 1936, 1937, the idea of incorporating 26 million new people into a new social insurance program in which those people would have to be monitored year after year after year in terms of their employment status and what their eligibility was for Social Security and what benefits they would be due when they turned 65. It was a major logistical and administrative undertaking. And when the Social Security Administration called in various management consultants, management experts to look at the problem, how are we going to sign up these people? How are we going to administer this program? Particularly when we have this society where so many people have the same name, Jones, Smith, Roberts, Thompson. How are we going to keep track of everybody? The administrative task was overwhelming. And a number of these management experts came back and said, it can't be done. You can't do what you are planning to do with this new program. But they kept at it, and by dint of great effort, came up with an innovation that we all take for granted today. The Social Security number. The idea of giving everybody a unique numerical identifier that it was based on where they were geographically. That was the first step towards solving the administrative problems of Social Security. But even after you came up with that idea, it was, how are we going to recruit people? How are we going to sign them up? Well, the way that they did this was by using the U.S. Postal Service. Only the U.S. Postal Service had the network, had the infrastructure to actually get out there and pass out applications and get the applications back. In fact, it was the post office that was responsible for giving out the first Social Security numbers. But even after you incorporated 25 million people into this program, even after they were all given their unique Social Security numbers, all you had at that time was a pile of data. You had no way to follow them. You had no way to manage the data. You had no way to basically administer the complexities of this program. And what they needed, of course, was an IT firm to manage all the data. And at the time, there were only 3 information technology companies that were sophisticated enough to handle this kind of enterprise. One was Burroughs, another was NCR, and the third was an emerging company called IBM. Now, the problem with all 3 of these companies was that they were in terrible financial straits at that time. The reason that they were in terrible straits is because the Depression had been going on for 8 years, and because IT companies depend on a vibrant economy and their partnership with business in order to generate revenue. The contraction of the economy had basically put all of them in a terrible position. Now, what Burroughs and NCR had done is that they looked at the economic climate, looked at all the future indicators, and said, look, this depression may go on for quite a while. We're going to have to adopt an austerity campaign to deal with this. We're going to have to slash payroll. We're going to have to lower overhead. We're going to have to cut down on our R&D. We're going to have to let our inventory wither. We're going to have to hunker down and try to ride out this depression as long as it takes. IBM, on the other hand, took exactly the opposite approach. IBM came to the conclusion that the depression was going to be short-lived. So IBM kept a full workforce, kept plowing forward with its R&D, kept its inventory high, kept producing new equipment, and as a result, had a pretty fully functioning business going at the time. So, unfortunately for IBM, Burroughs and NCR were correct in their predictions of how long the depression would last. It lasted quite a while. IBM was wrong. So at the time that Social Security was passed, IBM was basically hemorrhaging money. It was taking on debt, and it was floundering as a company. So when the Social Security Administration went looking to find a firm to handle its workload, it was clear which firm was the one that was best positioned. It was IBM. Only IBM had the workforce, had the equipment, had the infrastructure to handle the enormous demands of Social Security. So it was precisely because IBM had made this bad business decision that it was in a position to be such a good partner to Social Security. Another reason it was a good partner was that it had just invented a new piece of equipment, the 077 collator, that was able to process 480 punch cards a minute. Wow, that was state-of-the-art back then. So it was able to massage the data in a way that had never been done before. And in fact, it took so many of these machines, and they weighed so much that they had to go looking for office space because they couldn't find a suitable office space in Washington, D.C. finally, they found 120,000 feet of office space in Baltimore with floors that were sturdy enough to handle the weight of all the equipment it would take to process the information. I mean, this was a major new thrust for government that it had never had to face before. So it's really interesting to think of the role of serendipity in all this. You might say that Social Security pulled IBM's irons out of the fire and possibly saved it from bankruptcy. And IBM, in turn, became a great partner for Social Security. And as we know, went on to be the dominant player in the IT market for the next 50 years or so. So there were a lot of difficult moments along the way in terms of figuring out the administrative solutions to the problems of Social Security, just as there will be a lot of very difficult moments for Obamacare, as we're witnessing. But Social Security managed to surmount them all. And there's one other important thing that I'd like to say about the official launch of Social Security in 1940. It was terrible. It was awful. Now, and the reason I say that is because what Congress tried to do at that time was it realized how big the program was. So it tried to lessen the administrative burden by compiling a list of jobs that were not eligible for Social Security benefits. So if you were a government worker, you're out of luck. Nurse, out of luck. Hospital worker, out of luck. Teacher, out of luck. Domestic servant, out of luck. Agricultural worker, you're not eligible. There was a huge list of jobs that did not pass muster in terms of meriting Social Security benefits. And interestingly, if you look at a profile of the jobs that were covered by Social Security versus the ones that weren't, the jobs that weren't covered tended to be the ones populated by women and by minorities. Overwhelmingly, the jobs that were covered by Social Security were the ones that tended to be filled by white males. And when you read the literature, there's an interesting debate going on as to whether this was a form of overt racism and sexism on the part of legislators, or whether it was a kind of benign neglect. But we can't do everything at once, so let's give the lion's share of the proceeds to the white males, because that's what we're used to doing. So at the time of the launch of Social Security in 1940, half the workforce was locked out of Social Security benefits. So I say it was terrible because if such a program existed today, we'd call it a scandal. We'd call it an outrage. We'd be up in arms. But, over the decades, Social Security became much more inclusive and it filled in the gaps. But in 1940, there was a lot of work to be done. So, my point is that launches are difficult. As I say in my title, rollouts are a bitch. It takes all kinds of problem solving and troubleshooting to get a big program like this off the ground. It's not often in a state that's complete and that is satisfying to everybody. It needs to be tweaked and honed over the years, as Social Security was. But I have every belief that come 2017, when President Obama leaves office and the incoming president, Elizabeth Warren, just kidding, Hillary, when the incoming president comes in, we'll all look back and we'll say, wow, what was all that fuss about in 2013? Certainly seems like a long time ago now. Because I expect that Obamacare, just like Social Security, will eventually become a success and a fixture in American life. I'm Jeff Rowan. Thanks for watching.